Hi, this is our presentation on Posidonia oceanica, or Neptune grass, by Anna Mazenberg, Benjamin Dow, and Brianna Stigger. First, we'll be going over location, abiotic and biotic factors, and biodiversity. Then we'll be going over human and invasive impact, and lastly, conservation. The location of P. oceanica is in an extensive monospecific meadow within the Mediterranean Sea from depths of 0 to 40 meters. The seagrass presides in only one location, so is classified as endemic. Changes in P. oceanica abiotic factors can lead to major changes. First, when we change the light, both gene expression and plant traits differ between shallow and deep. As deep increases, seagrass adapts and modifies to fit the environment. Like having deep shoots will also lead to delaying flowers and subsequent seed development. Across this gradient, shoot density, leaf biomass, specific leaf area decline from intertidal and subtidal, and heat stress, with deep plants demonstrating low tolerance than shallow plants. This seagrass inhabits environments with very stable salinity regimes, and the meadow declines through a significant decrease in shoot density in both high salinity and very high salinity. Surviving shoots have reduced size and lowered leaf growth rate, but more generally a reduction in photosynthetic leaf surfaces caused by increase in proportion of necrotic leaf area. And it's up to around 60% for very high salinities, 60% reducing area. There's also non-structural carbohydrates concentration decrease in the rhizomes due to change in osmoregulation. And this shows that it is not tolerant to change in salinity.
As been explained, the Neptune grass is typically found along the shorelines of the Mediterranean Sea. They're very luscious environments and can stretch to be very wide. And so because of these, you're going to have a lot of different organisms rely on these Neptune meadows for food source, for spawning or nesting grounds, an oxygen source, or just for protection either from predators or from the waves as they crash along the shore. And so some organisms that you'll typically find here are these small fish, as you can see in this top picture, seahorses, crustaceans, any type of sessile organism is going to be found here. And also any organism that relies on dead or decaying matter, as in this bottom left picture, you can see there's a lot of like crustaceans and invertebrates that are actually settling along the rhizomes of these Neptune grass. You'll also see a lot of epiphytes settle along the blades, and so that can include bacteria, algae, fungi, anything like that is going to be found within the Neptune grass. So because you have all of these species relying on the Neptune grass, you're going to have many different symbiotic relationships. And so one of these is with the Electra Posidonia. It's a bryozoan or an epiphyte, and it settles along the internal part of the Neptune grass. And so because it's only typically found within or on Neptune grass, it's going to have a lot of its traits adapted to living on this species. And so as plankton and other planktonic products get trapped within these grass blades, the Electra Posidonia can actually use them to eat and feed on, and also filter water as well. So as it's filtering the water, it's going to push it downwards into these benthic environments. And so this species actually is involved with benthic pelagic coupling of the Neptune grass. Another thing that you can typically find here are the accumulation of dead leaves or rhizomes, and these dead leaves and rhizomes can actually push along the shore. As you can see, like in the bottom left corner, they push along the shore and they can actually stop waves and beach erosion, or they can act as a habitat for lots of different species. And so you'll typically find these burrowing decapods there. So there's different species of shrimp, and they will actually use this dead and decaying matter to make burrows and burrow themselves into the ground. And at the same time, they're actively decomposing these dead and decaying leaves and rhizomes. You'll also see something called Neptune balls, and they'll actually wash along the shore in the Mediterranean Sea. And basically, these are balls of like decaying matter, and within these balls, you'll see different like small amounts of plastic. And so these like white and blue things that you see within these balls of leaves and rhizomes, they're actually plastic. And so as you know, the waves are crashing along the shore, the different leaves are breaking off, the rhizomes are breaking off, and they're forming this dead matter, and at the same time they're kind of wrapping around the plastic found here. So I thought that was pretty cool that it's kind of, you know, cleaning itself in a way. And yeah, so I'll just pass it on to Anna now.
So I'll be moving on to the anthropogenic stressors. The first anthropogenic impact that I wanted to talk about is warming waters. So Posidonia oceanica, like most marine species, is acutely impacted by climate change, and in particular, extreme temperature events. So anything above about 27 degrees Celsius are likely to impact this seagrass species negatively, as Ben mentioned, and that's especially the case in the case of seedlings. So the photosynthetic system of the seagrass is usually damaged at these higher temperatures, and the grass will therefore have limited leaf growth, quicker leaf aging or death, and sometimes complete mortality of the plant. Additionally, the second one I wanted to cover is noise exposure, and that's really a concern because humans often produce really low frequency noise in the ocean, much lower than is naturally produced, especially with industrial operations like offshore windmills. So Neptune grass and other seagrasses are unable to move from this noise as they're sessile, and therefore they're really greatly impacted by it. And low frequency sound has been found to result in structural changes in Posidonia oceanica. So the statocysts, which are responsible for detecting gravity and vibrations, are altered after exposure to low frequency sound. Also starch grains, which are usually used in energy storage, were impacted, deteriorating and becoming malformed as a result of noise exposure, like in the next 48 hours after the exposure. So it's really immediate impact. And finally, the fungal symbionts of living in the roots of the seagrass were also found to be impacted. So more research needs to be done to find like what ranges of sound are least harmful to the species and how we can produce less of that low frequency sound, but it does have an impact. And finally, eutrophication as a result of increased nutrient input through human activities such as fish farming have also impacted Neptune grass in the Mediterranean. Large increases in nutrient content such as organic contents in the soil, nitrogen and phosphorus, have led to falls in seagrass shoot density. And one of these impacts is thought to be the growth of epiphytes in these conditions, which usually lead to a competition with other organisms and a limited amount of light. And so the plants usually adapt by growing more in their roots, but obviously they need more oxygen for that. And since there's not enough light for photosynthesis, they're not able to get enough oxygen to adapt, basically. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, epiphytic growth is often an issue for this plant because it results in lower leaf biomass and lower levels of light for photosynthesis. And usually invasive species of algae are at fault for that. So one exception is actually the invasive species. It's a green macroalgae and it's called Caulerpa cylindricae. Which is actually no longer harming the seagrass population. So in the past, it was thought to be harmful, but now studies have found that this algae either positively benefits the growth of this seagrass, or at the very least, Posidonia oceanica keeps the invasive algae from spreading. So basically, as that invasive algae approaches the seagrass bed, there's less of that algae found in the bed than around it. So it is helpful to the ecosystem in that way as well. Another species, a species of red algae called Lococladia lalmandi, is actually still considered to be harmful to Posidonia oceanica, as are a lot of different algae species. It leads to shorter leaves, decreased shoot density, and mortality of Posidonia oceanica. The seagrass shows signs of oxidative stress as a result of the growth of this algae nearby. And then in the photo to the right, you can see kind of the high levels of that red algae and how it's really just like growing all over the seagrass and letting its light and just its room to grow in its movement. Algal species that harm the growth of this seagrass stand to harm the positive impacts, such as habitat and the biodiversity that they create. Changes in the composition of invertebrates and aquatic plants, as well as trophic shifts, have been found when Neptune grass populations change. Carbon and nitrogen isotope signatures have also been found to change in like herbivores and other organisms that might eat that seagrass, or other organisms nearby it, in response to impacts on Neptune grass. So basically, when it changes, so does the rest of the environment around it. Now you can go ahead and switch. Okay, so finally we can talk about kind of the conservation of seagrass, or of Neptune grass. In the process of restoring populations of Posidonia oceanica that have declined as a result of invasive species or anthropogenic impacts, nets can actually be used, or sorry, not nets, mats. Mats can actually be used as a source of stabilization, as you guys can see on the left on the bottom. So other engineering techniques have also been tried. So similarly to kind of gardening on land, they've tried like metal sticks and concrete frames, but those are both like really expensive, and they're not really guaranteed to work. Mats actually help to imitate the structures that would naturally anchor a seagrass population. So it's kind of the closest thing you can get to just how it would be growing in the wild. Such as the roots of like previous plants that they can use to anchor themselves. So in prior studies, they've also been found to be a good base for the development of other plants or algae as well, which again helps to mimic that natural environment. Degradable mats are particularly helpful in that they are not like permanently present. So like once the seagrass has established itself, those will degrade and it'll just become a natural meadow. You can also use transplants, which obviously you would need to get a plant from somewhere to restore that habitat, but new methods are being found to do this more like cost and time effectively. So while transplants can kind of be taken from an established seagrass meadow, that might harm the current meadow in some way. But studies have actually recently shown that Posidonia oceanica can also be collected after storm activity for transplant. So if it's been kind of ripped out of the ground by some sort of like tropical storm, you can then collect that from the beach and transplant those, which I think is really interesting. There are some costs associated with that because it's best like replanted in in autumn. And so you want to kind of store them in a tank for a while before you replant them so you can maximize that survival rate. But once you've kind of gotten past that cost, they've been shown to survive up to 3 years just like in a tank so far within like the studies done in this time frame. So yeah, that's a really effective way to do it, and you don't have to harm any like seabeds that are already existing, and it's still the natural plant. And then finally, plant growth regulator hormones have also been applied to Posidonia oceanica with some success, speeding up the rates at which roots appear and the length of seedlings dramatically, which theoretically could be helpful in reestablishing meadows as well, because obviously if it can grow faster, it will probably survive for longer.
Here's our works cited. And that's it. Thank you for watching.